Going once, going twice, sold. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, February 24th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. It is strategy week. Today on the show, we are talking auction strategy, just general strategy talk on the format. Plus, we'll get into the nitty-gritty, some nominations, bidding, all that fun stuff. But it was a very busy weekend, the first of spring training. We've got some news. We've got some StatCast data, some pitch mix stuff to talk about. So let's start there. We'll get that out of the way, and then we will get into some auction talk. But news and notes from the weekend, and just going to quickly talk about some general headlines first, and then we'll go by injuries and StatCast stuff and so on and so forth. So first up, Felix Bautista threw live batting practice Sunday. First time he's faced live hitters. I mean, they're always alive, I would hope, since having Tommy John surgery. So that was a good step for him. James Wood, who's dealing with left quad tendonitis, participated in outfield drills on Sunday and continues to take batting practice. So some good news for him. Freddie Freeman began a running progression Thursday and is on track to make his Cactus League debut this week. Cutter Crawford might not be ready for opening day due to patellar tendon soreness. The White Sox are considering Mike Clevenger, in a late inning relief role. So maybe saves, who knows. And the Brewers signed both Mark Canha and Manuel Margot to minor league deals this weekend. So something's there. Any reactions? How was the weekend? How are you guys doing? How about that news? Does any of it matter?
It's good to see James Wood progressing because that had been one of the more quietly concerning things in the early going. He's dealing with tendonitis in his left quad and hadn't really been doing anything but swinging for the first week or so after reporting, but sounds like he's progressing well. And I mean, hopefully we'll be able to see him in games by the beginning of March. So that's a good one. Freddie Freeman, obviously, didn't sound like there was any concern about his opening day availability. Remember, the Dodgers open about 9 days before everyone else when they play the Cubs on March 18th in Korea.
Yes.
Japan, Tokyo.
This one's in Tokyo.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he'll be ready for that. And
the Cutter Crawford thing,
it's a little concerning.
Well, it's concerning, but it's clarifying because if Lucas Giolito is fully recovered from Tommy John surgery, they got 6 guys for their rotation. And you imagine, as we talked about last week, at some point the Red Sox, like every other team, are going to rely on a 6th man in their rotation, but not as consistently as the first 5. And so if Cutter Crawford, we can't even be sure he's available for the start.
Yeah.
Well, that would automatically make him the 6th man. Again, presuming Giolito is good to go. And that probably would take him off draft boards.
Yeah.
In all but the deepest of leagues. And he should be the odd man out, I would say, if Giolito's healthy. It just, now there's even more reason for it. He's not healthy.
It's a weird rotation because it could be pretty good, but it's really easy to see things going disastrously for the Red Sox rotation. Because, look, I think we all agree Crochet is awesome. Tanner Houck is good, but solid. Walker Buehler, who knows? Lucas Giolito, who knows? And Brian Bayo has been slowed at the start of spring training with a shoulder injury. So
yeah, that's another injury to their rotation already.
Yeah, so it's and for all the prospect depth that the Red Sox have, they don't really have a lot of great pitching depth in the minors. So yeah, it's I don't know. We could be seeing Quinn Priester in the Red Sox rotation soon, and that would kind of things are a little weird with the Red Sox all over the place right now.
Yeah, because you had Alex Bregman starting at third base on Sunday. Notably, their intended second baseman starting at third base.
Maybe. I mean, we genuinely don't know what position he's going to play. Rafael Devers is not currently healthy enough to play third base, despite his "I am a third baseman" protestations.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a chance of a trade. I think I think the Red Sox are the second most likely team to make, well, the third most likely team to make a trade this spring, because I say third most likely because talks between the Cardinals and the Astros have picked up again for Nolan Arenado. And the the Cardinals want to shed Nolan Arenado. They've already said they want to get 550 to 600 at bats for Nolan Gorman, and I don't see how that happens if Nolan Arenado's still there. And the Astros are intending to move Jose Altuve to left field, it seems. They could put Isaac Paredes at second, Nolan Arenado at third. Great defense, good park for him. It just makes too much sense now that the Red Sox option has closed for Arenado and he can't cling to that.
And yet, there was also a report this weekend that there were conflicting reports on the Arenado's front. There was the talk that they are opening discussions back up. There was also talk that when they did discuss it after Bregman signed, and he was still not open to it. So I think that was the Athletic that reported that. So it's like it does make sense to everyone except Nolan Arenado, apparently. So
I thought the report I read said that he was more willing this time, but yeah,
I don't know. But yeah, it's there's a lot of moving parts in a couple of different places with the Red Sox. That rotation feels like it goes sideways pretty quickly. And Rafael Devers he didn't have surgery on his shoulders, but apparently he is not 100% yet, which is, I don't know. It's a little concerning.
Yeah. So something to monitor there with Rafael Devers and the Red Sox. I also saw a report the past couple weeks that they weren't willing to give up Willy Abreu in a Dylan Cease trade, which was a little surprising. I get that it's 1 year of Cease, and obviously Willy Abreu is under team control for at least a while.
Yeah, but he's fine.
Yeah, so we'll see.
Like you have like 6 better outfield. That's probably an exaggeration, but like if you count Christian Campbell as a potential outfielder, which might be the clearest path to playing time right now, they've got a lot of options. And
Willy Abreu, not to mention Roman Anthony.
Yeah,
Willy Abreu seems like the path of least resistance for Roman Anthony. So I don't know.
I don't understand what's good. Things are weird in Boston right now, I will say, and it's also weird. And why do the White Sox keep bringing back Mike Clevenger? What is happening here? I just don't understand. Like, I just don't understand the thought process here.
They said late inning relief.
Yeah.
Specifically late inning. I mean, that's the highest, that's the biggest name closer candidate. If you're really dead set on getting a save source from the White Sox, which you shouldn't be.
I mean, maybe they just
could be Clevenger. I don't know.
Maybe they didn't want to say closer because it feels too optimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't want to jinx anything saying they'll have games to close this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have to win games to have save opportunities, right? How about some injuries that popped up this weekend? I'll just read off all these and then you guys can react. Wyatt Langford held out of baseball for 5 to 7 days after being diagnosed with a mild oblique strain. We learned about that on Friday. Jarren Duran was scratched Sunday due to calf soreness, not believed to be serious. Elliot Ramos is dealing with a slight oblique strain as well and is expected to be unavailable for about a week. Parker Meadows tweaked his triceps on a throw Saturday, though it's not viewed as a serious concern. White Sox reliever Prelander Berroa has a grade 1 right elbow strain, and Rangers pitching prospect Alejandro Rosario needs elbow surgery and will miss the entire 2025 season. This only really affects those who play in dynasty leagues, but obviously still sucks because he was a fast rising prospect, so we won't see him all this upcoming season.
Very exciting prospect was Alejandro Rosario, and Tommy John surgery, presuming that's what it ends up being.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah.
I sometimes feel like prospect stock drops too much with Tommy John surgery, but you gotta imagine, like, part of it is just stashing a guy not knowing anything for a year and a half. No updates on his, and what if he comes back and he's just a shell of what he once was? I remember stashing Jake Eater and that Rays prospect whose name escapes me at the moment.
Shane Baz?
No. He hasn't amounted to anything. Because
Brent Honeywell?
When he came back from Tommy John surgery, he didn't look the same. And that's always a risk, even for a prospect as exciting as Alejandro Rosario, who's exciting, but doesn't have a great track record of success yet. He hadn't been in the minors for that long. I would say of these injury stories, though, the most concerning for fantasy is Wyatt Langford, just
Absolutely.
because obliques sometimes don't appear serious, but then they just linger. And they're giving him a week off. There are only so many weeks till opening day. And so what if 1 week bleeds into 2 and 2 weeks bleeds into 3, and then where are we? I've seen Wyatt Langford going as early as round 3 sometimes.
I mean, that's his ADP. I did an ADP review piece, and I looked at the biggest risers from January to February. His NFBC ADP in February is 38.4. I had the reaction like Jason Lee in Mallrats, that kid is on the escalator again, because like we're doing this again with Wyatt Langford, except now it's a top 40 pick.
He didn't even homer yet.
Hey, he didn't even have a good spring yet. At least last year he had a good spring. Look, I get it. And what can happen is, like, if it's a player that everybody wants, it's just you end up in an arms race and everybody has to take him 1 pick earlier every time. And I guess that can happen. But I'm hoping this cools the price down on Wyatt Langford a little bit for our own sake, just because we are running the risk of drafting Wyatt Langford too high again. And I think even his January ADP was 43.8. That's verging on a little too high, although I can see the case for it. But 3rd round pick, if that's where he ended up, would be really tough to stomach.
And hopefully that's all this ends up being. Remember, Matt Shaw started spring training with a little bit of an oblique thing, and he seems to be past it now. So it may just be the 5-7 days is all that Wyatt Langford misses, but it's impossible to say for sure at this point.
Yeah, you hope that they are really, really careful with it, because like Scott said, baseball is all about rotational, movements, and that's a big thing with the oblique. And that's why if you don't let it fully heal, these things have a tendency of just lingering and lingering and lingering. So there's no reason to push him. I hope we don't see him in a game until mid-March at this point. I'd rather that than him rush back and not be 100% when he does.
Actually,
by the way,
go ahead, Scott.
The Rays prospect I was thinking of, by the way, Cole Wilcox, had Tommy John surgery and hasn't looked the same since.
I hopped in a NFBC slow draft last week on Wednesday, 15-team roto draft and hold. Wyatt Langford went at pick 30 before the news came out. So at the 2-3 turn of a 15-team league. So it looks like, at least for the time being, that price will come back down a little bit. We'll see where it settles in for Wyatt Langford. Let's take a quick break. When we return, we'll go over some StatCast data from the weekend, and we'll be back right after this.
One of golf's elite courses, Quail Hollow, hosts the game's top players at the PGA Championship this May on CBS.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball today, recapping the first weekend of spring training before we get into some auction strategy talk. And I've got some StatCast data. This is all pitcher related. I wasn't going to bring up hitter stuff yet. We'll wait till we get some more hitter data. But just from the first starts that we've seen this weekend, it's mostly velocity related. But Corbin Burns' cutter, sinker, and changeup were all down over 2 miles per hour compared to last year. He still struck out the side in his only inning of work. So that's kind of within the range of he could just get built up over the course of spring training. Sandy Alcantara made his.
Plus, we want the cutter to be down for Burns from last year, because things got better for him in September when he stopped overthrowing that pitch.
Yeah, but it was also down on everything else. So
I hear you.
Something to monitor.
Yeah.
Sandy Alcantara made his return from Tommy John on Sunday. He averaged 98.8 miles per hour with his fastball. He only threw 1 inning of work. Kenta Maeda's fastball, sweeper, and sinker and splitter, were all up between 1.5 and 2 miles per hour in his start. Zebby Matthews, who is I don't think he's still prospect eligible, but a young player in the Twins organization, his fastball, slider, and cutter were all up between 1.7 and 2.1 miles per hour. So maybe a deep post-hype sleeper there. Tristan McKenzie averaged 94.2 miles per hour on his fastball. That was up 3 miles per hour compared to where it was last year, and it was up almost 2 miles per hour compared to when he was at his best back in 2022. Jack Leiter threw 2 scoreless innings of relief. His velocity was up over 2 miles per hour on fastball, slider, and changeup. He also debuted a new sinker that he threw 7 times. David Festa, a pitcher for the Twins, His fastball was up 1 mile per hour, slider up 1.6, changeup up 2 miles per hour. And Casey Mize, his fastball was up 1.4 miles per hour, averaged almost 97. His splitter was up 4 miles per hour in his start Sunday. Last one, Matt Waldron's knuckleball was up almost 4 miles per hour compared to where it was last year. There's a lot of names here. I don't know that all of them matter, but
well,
thought on any of them.
A lot of them are exciting talents. It's certainly the two twins, David Festa and Zebby Matthews. I think their rotation only has room for one. And not that either was guaranteed a spot coming in, but those two are the ones I'm probably most excited about. Should be an interesting battle there. But Tristan McKenzie, of course, wasn't that long ago we thought of him as a must-start pitcher in fantasy. It's just usually first spring start for these guys, right? And usually at the start of spring training, we're here like, okay, the velocity's down for these guys. Don't worry about it so much. They're building up. To have this many pitchers who weren't even really on our radar so much for drafting suddenly come out with greatly improved velocity like this, it's hard not to get excited because this is the start of spring training. They're not supposed to be up to full capacity yet, you wouldn't think.
Yeah,
the pitching pool is so deep that I don't know what to do with this info. Like, I don't know how excited I'm supposed to get about David Festa because how can I fit him into my draft plans?
Yeah, and like you said, it's not clear if there's room for both Festa and Matthews in the Twins rotation. Matthews, it's very interesting just because he's such a command and control over stuff guy that if he can add some stuff without sacrificing the command, well, all of a sudden things start to look a lot more interesting for him because, he's one of these guys who's like 10.5 K per nine in the minors, but, sub 2 walk rate. And he got hit really hard when he got to the majors because if you don't have premium stuff and you're pitching in the zone, you might be able to get away with that, against guys in the minors who can't do anything with it, but major leaguers are going to make you pay for it. So if the stuff plays up there, that's really interesting. And then I just want to focus on Tristan McKenzie for a minute, because this is, I don't want to say it's the hardest he's ever thrown because that's probably an exaggeration, but I mean, he averaged 92.5 in 2022 when he was very good. So there is a world in which a healthy Tristan McKenzie throwing mid-90s consistently. Yeah, the hardest he's ever averaged in a start was 94.5 miles per hour. So not far from what he was at in this spring outing. If he can sit 94, that's a big deal because he's very fastball heavy. He always has been. It's 55% fastballs at least usually. Curveball, slider. It's a thin margin for error as we've seen the past couple of years for Tristan McKenzie. And if the fastball can play up, I think it does put him back on fantasy radars in a way he really hasn't been. We're jumping around here. Sandy Alcantara, obviously first start back from Tommy John surgery. One thing that you can say is sometimes guys, when they know they're only going to throw an inning, even in spring training, they can just air it out. Yep. But the fact that Sandy has looked like Sandy, I think is a big deal. And I did see Craig Mish on Sunday say, I don't know how much of this is reported versus his own gut feel, but he's very plugged into the Marlins. He said he doesn't really expect any limitations for Sandy Alcantara this year. Maybe I think it would be still surprising to see 220 innings like we saw.
I mean, that would be a record by far for a pitcher fresh off Tommy John surgery.
180. I think 180 is a reasonable ceiling. I'm not saying that's
close to the record, right?
Matt
Harvey has the record.
What's his name? The big dude, Lance Lynn. He threw a ton of innings in his first year back from Tommy John surgery. Let me see if I can find. It was
189 for 189 and a third for Lance.
It was
Matt Harvey.
It was 186 and a third for Lance Lynn in 2017. I don't know if he pitched in the postseason that year at all, but that's not a concern for Sandy Alcantara.
I mean, I'll take the under there. My understanding is the Marlins front office now is pretty forward thinking. So they're not just going to Rub some dirt on it, kid, with Sandy Alcantara. I think they're going to protect that asset.
Yeah. My read on the situation, and I feel like maybe there were even articles about that he would be limited at least early on. I think it makes sense just because this is the Marlins' most like prized asset on their roster now that isn't like a young player. Like this is someone that they could actually trade for value. So I think they want to protect that investment. And then if they can, maybe ship out Sandy Alcantara mid-season and get like a haul for him, assuming he's still healthy at that point. So, but we'll see. At least, first step was a good one here for Sandy. Some fun team debuts this weekend. Clay Holmes with the Mets, 3 perfect innings with 3 strikeouts. He debuted a new cutter and a kick changeup, which seems to be like the talk of the baseball world right
This
now.
is one of these things that just like, it's just a specific grip on a changeup. And like, but because I don't know, I think it's like a trad athletics thing that they've become known for, that like they're like branding it. And it's just a changeup that gets more downward movement, basically.
Sure.
I was encouraged though to see how often he threw that changeup, because a lot of times you hear about a guy working on a new pitch in spring training and then he'll throw 1 or 2 in a spring start, and it's like, okay, is this really going to be part of your repertoire? But he threw 21% of his pitches were changeups, and Chris has pointed out before that Holmes got hit hard by lefties, and you would imagine he's breaking out that pitch directly to counter lefties. And look, I like him either way, because 65% ground ball rate, hitters can only do so much damage with a 65% ground ball rate. But if he has a new weapon against lefties, that only helps Clay Holmes.
Yeah, and it was also 3 cutters all to lefties. So I think that's going to be the plan here for Clay Holmes, is 4 seamers and sinkers, a lot of changeups, a lot of cutters, and then a little bit of the sweeper. And it all of a sudden it's a 6-pitch mix. He threw 6 pitches in his spring debut. Now, will he throw a changeup 21% of the time in the regular season? I would doubt it. And, obviously he's working on it and trying to get live reps and all that, but I think it's a good sign. Yeah, I definitely came away from this weekend. I don't care about the results. I care about the approach and what the arsenal looked like, but it's what we need to see from Clay Holmes to make me believe that he can be a starter.
It was a pretty rough Saturday for you, boy, because on top of Clay Holmes, we had Juan Soto, very first at bat with the Mets, hits a home run, just breaks the hearts of all Yankee fans everywhere. Alex Bregman went 3 for 3 with a home run in his Red Sox debut on Sunday. Garrett Crochet recorded 5 outs in his debut, 4 of those via the strikeout. Jeffrey Springs, 2 shutout innings with 2 strikeouts for the A's on Sunday. And Danny Jansen homered for the Rays. If he's healthy and gets everyday playing time, maybe we could get 20-ish home runs from someone like Danny Jansen.
I will say spring means nothing. Like, spring performance means nothing. I don't care that Alex Bregman went 3 for 3. That being said, I don't know if you guys saw today. I was watching that game. It was like the perfect proof of concept of what Alex Bregman at Fenway Park, because they have, mini Fenway down in, I don't know, whatever small town in Florida they play in. And he hit the home run over the Green Monster, and the double was right off the top of the Green Monster. So like that was the perfect proof of concept of Alex Bregman. Like, I think the home run was just like one of those super, super high, not really all that far home runs that just probably would not have been out in most parks, but it was there.
Some prospects I'll quickly mention, 3 in deeper leagues that could maybe make an impact this season. White Sox shortstop prospect Colson Montgomery homered in his spring debut. Rockies outfielder Zach Veen went 1 for 3 with a sock and a shoe. The first time I've said that this year. On Saturday, former top prospect for them.
Magnificent bat flip for Zach Veen on that 433-foot home run too.
It really was magnificent. And he was added to the 40-man roster for the Rockies this offseason. Blue Jays prospect Orelvis Martinez homer on Saturday. Sounds like he is competing for a job on the team. And then 2 names one of them maybe we could see this year, but for your first-year player drafts or dynasty leagues, Cardinals first-round pick from last year, J.J. Weatherholt, 2 for 3 with a home run on Sunday. And Royals first-rounder Jack Caglione hit a home run, 115.4 exit velocity, 435 feet on Sunday. maybe we could see him in the second half of the season. All right. That was a lot to get to from the weekend. Quick things to promote here. Programming for the week. We'll have head-to-head strategy on Monday. We'll talk about both points and head-to-head categories. We'll have a live head-to-head points mock draft on Tuesday night. And you can expect one of those per week, basically up until the start of the season. So come hang out. Scott, do we have a time on that yet? 9:30 p.m.?
9:30 is what we're aiming for.
Okay, so you could come. You can watch this draft live. We'll probably recap our teams at the end of it. But yes, we will have one of those, I think either on like Monday or Tuesday every week leading up to the start of the season. On Wednesday night, we'll have Roto Strategy. Thursday night, we will have a mailbag. And then we'll have a bonus pod coming out next Saturday. That will be with Jeff Zimmerman, who is obviously super smart. He's a friend of the industry, and he is coming on to talk about a book that he co-authors, The Process. Thanks to everyone watching us live. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let's talk a little auction strategy, and very fun format, a very strategic format. There's always a lot that goes into planning for them, if you plan for them.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, let's find out if you're planning for them this year. And just within the draft, I mean, there's so many different things that can happen and so many things that you could think about. So some elements of this conversation I think will be useful more for beginners. I think other elements will be more useful for skilled players, people who have played in this format before. But Chris, for those who haven't played the auction format, it's exactly what it sounds like. You have a finite amount of money, usually $260 that you're using to bid on players. It's not like a snake draft where you're just kind of beholden to where you are in the draft and ADP and things like that. For those who haven't tried it yet, why play in the auction format? What do they need to know about it?
One, it's just the most fun way to draft your team, and fantasy sports are supposed to be fun. So you should lean into that. I mean, look, obviously everyone's different and you don't have to enjoy a salary cap or auction draft, but I think most people who play fantasy fairly seriously think it's the best way to disperse your talent because one, it adds an element of uniqueness and randomness. You know, your snake drafts tend to follow very similar formats, and if you're picking 12th, you're not going to have the chance to get Aaron Judge or Shohei Ohtani or Bobby Witt. In an auction or salary cap draft, you can get whoever you can afford. And that's where the fun comes from, is you can really decide. This is where you get to put your personal mark on your team and decide, okay, these are the guys I'm going to get. This is the approach I want to go. I want to go, super heavy on stars. I don't want to spend any money on pitcher, whatever it is. You can build that team and you can play psychological games with your league mates and you can exploit your league mates' tendencies. And you can go, like, we just did the Scott White Dynasty draft today. And I went into the draft knowing there was no way I was going to pay for Roki Sasaki, no matter what. Like, if he was sitting there, prices in this league are super inflated. If he was sitting there at $30 and 2 seconds were left on the clock, okay, I'll hit +1. But that was never going to happen. He went for 51.
Yeah,
I went in knowing that if I was in the nominating order early, Roki Sasaki would be the first player I'm going to nominate because I want to get him out and it ended up being $51, get that off the board. And so you can be a little more strategic about how you approach it in an auction.
Yeah, for me, I agree. I think it's the most fun way to play fantasy. And again, that's subjective. A lot of people love doing snake drafts and I love them too. I just love auctions a little bit more. It's, you can get any player you want, kind of, up to a certain extent, right? Like, you can't literally get every single player you want, but if you have a feeling about Julio Rodriguez bouncing back, if you have like the third pick, you're probably not going to take Julio Rodriguez and he's probably not going to be there for you in the second round. But if you play an auction, you could just say, hey, I have a feeling on Julio Rodriguez. I'm going to go out and get him this year.
Yeah, you can do that. I'm kind of in a weird place with the auctions right now because in theory, all of that's true. In theory, you can get exactly who you want. In theory, you can really put your mark on your team. In practice, that's easier said than done.
But see, this is why you guys always get in your heads about auctions.
Well, I'm trying to avoid. My whole point is I'm trying to avoid that. See, if I say, I don't know, in the most recent one, some of my favorites like Ryan Mountcastle and Bo Bichette went for way more than they were projected to go for. I had them penciled in first base and shortstop. This was an AL only, by the way. Ryan Mountcastle, Bo Bichette. I like them more than everybody else. Certainly, I could get them for the price I have them listed for because I like them more than everybody else. But they went for way more, which makes me wonder why everybody drafts them as late as they do. Is it just because like you're pre-programmed in a draft to know
you can,
because you can. So what I'm saying is my favorites often end up being everybody's favorites. And so if I've planned to draft a guy, and maybe it won't be Ryan Mountcastle and Bo Bichette, that seemed weird that they happened to be inflated, but a trendy pick like Lawrence Butler, let's say I really want to get Lawrence Butler and I think he's a good value at his price. So I'm going to try and get him at his price. I'm going to pencil him into an outfield spot that way. Half the league's probably done the same thing. And so it becomes a game of chicken. Who's going to back down? Well, the reason I liked Lawrence Butler primarily is the price relative to the production. So I should probably be the one to back down. But then I need to have a backup plan. And the danger of coming in with too firm of a plan is that by the time Lawrence Butler has his name called, how many of those backup plans have already gone off the board?
That's the problem. Yeah, no, and that's the thing is
the problem.
If you have a plan for a player and they don't go until 150 picks in, one, you may just not have the money left. And two, if you miss out, you might be in a position where you can't afford not to draft them. And so that's why this has been a long running argument on the pod. Not really an argument, just a philosophical difference, because I am not a planner. I'm not organized in my life in anything. Like I'm a mess. I do all of my writing in one Google Doc that just says random, that has like 12 half written things dating back, like literally I was looking the other day, there's something like 4 years old sitting 27 pages down at the bottom. I am an extremely chaotic person. And I know that I can't go into a draft with a plan because I'm not, one, I don't want to spend my time doing that. There's video games to be played and whatnot. And two, I don't want to feel like because there's a lot of psychology that goes into the draft and into the auction. And I don't want to feel like I'm hemmed in and I have to get a player, because that's not how I think about fantasy baseball or fantasy sports in general. It's the specific player matters way less than the way you want to build your team. So like I have theories, I have ideas, I have concepts of a plan, but I don't want to say I am getting Lawrence Butler because it's because I watch every time we'll do one in March at some point in like 2 or 3 weeks. Right. And we always do it live and it's always this 4-hour ordeal. And you guys are like melting down 40 minutes in.
Well, how did we get to this? How did we get to this conversation? We got to this conversation because we were saying this is the chance for you to get any player you want and put your mark on your team. I'm saying not really. And it used to be more that way. It used to be I could come very close, 90% of the way to executing my plan in a given auction. But and this is true like in every fantasy format, and we've talked about it a lot. I have found over the years, my opinion starts to look a lot like everybody's opinion because analysis has just gotten so much stronger and it makes for less room to disagree on players. So the same players I think are good bang for the buck options, other people are likely to. So what I'm trying to say is I think I am going to try to go about it a little differently this year, believe it or not. And come in it like early in the draft. If I see a value, just take the value. Just take the value. And it's going to require some improvisation with those lesser positions. But that's how I won the Memorial Magazine League last year. I didn't go into that expecting to draft Shohei Ohtani, for goodness sakes, or Freddie Freeman. Normally, I target players at scarcer positions. DH is not a scarce position, obviously. Francisco Lindor. I think those were the three most expensive players I've bought. Shohei Ohtani, Freddie Freeman, and Francisco Lindor. And I just happened to like the price of them. And if you'll remember listening to that episode last year, we were drafting for the Memorial Magazine League. I was a mess. I won the league.
Well, because it's always 40 minutes into the podcast, Scott is a mess. He's just melting down. He's apoplectic. Nobody's ever been more upset about anything in fantasy sports than Scott 40 minutes into every auction he's ever done. And then by the end, it's like, I kind of like this team. And it's like, of course you do. Your team is not done being built. And that's why, like, I am much more likely to draft a player that I don't really like in an auction if everyone just decides they don't like them. Because ultimately you got to fill those 23 spots. They're not all going to be with your plan A. They're not all going to be with players you like. So I appreciate the flexibility to jump on values when they're presented, find the ebbs and flows in the drafts, because there are some drafts everybody spends a ton of money early. And the middle round of the draft, the middle part of the draft, the middle class is going to be the best values. And then sometimes people just don't want to spend their money early. And you end up with, guys who should be $45 going for 41. And so it's all different. And that's why I don't want to go into the draft with the auction with a plan, because it's gonna go sideways. You cannot predict how 12 different people are going to handle the market.
It used to be the plan I came up with was more like a salary range I wanted to, or a salary amount, because I want to go in knowing my plan adds up to $260. A salary amount I wanted to end up to draft at each position. But obviously some flexibility. I knew I wasn't going to hit every single one. I think I'm going to go in with a looser plan this time of sort of a couple of mid-range targets at every position, but see what studs I get at prices I like. See what studs I get at prices I like at the start of the auction, not really worrying about what position they fill, and then kind of looking at those mid-range targets I singled out at other positions and figuring out which ones I'm actually going to need to draft or which ones I've already filled the position for. If that makes sense.
What's so interesting about this format is there's no right answer. Like there are so many different ways
different in every draft
to go about winning, right? Like to that point, Chris, a lot of people, not a lot, but some people will ask us, why don't you talk about auction values on the show? And my answer usually is, every draft is so different. We have an idea of how much a player should go for. If you go check out our rankings, we have auction values next to every player based on, 12-team roto or 12-team head-to-head points leagues. But that is just an idea of what a player should go for. I mean, you can have two different 12-team roto leagues where Paul Skeens goes for $35 in one and $45 in the other. And there's not really any way to predict that beforehand.
And the other thing about that is every dollar that gets spent is necessarily a dollar that cannot be spent later in the draft. And so that's why it's you can set those auction values, but I think it's better to think of them as limits. I'm willing to spend to this point where it's not necessarily, this is what this guy should go for in every draft. Although the way we do it is we do the, $3,120, I think is what it ends up coming out to. Yep. So like we do have our values that come out to what they would be in every draft, but it's more, I will spend up to 48 and it's a plus or minus either way. I generally, if I've got George Kirby as an $18 player, that doesn't mean I'm just going to nominate George Kirby at $18. Like that's not how
values.
Of course.
You want him for 15 or 16. And if the way the draft has gone, you notice that, okay, I might have to go 20 to get George Kirby. then you might have to go 20. But
and it's not because you need George Kirby, but because to get that range of pitcher, that's what you need to do. That should be your main focus early on, is to get a sense of how the rest of the room is drafting. Yeah. And that's mainly what those projected auction values we provide, that's mainly what they're for. Because you do know that in a 12-team league with 23 roster spots to fill, the numbers we've provided will add up to the correct number. So if all the high-end players are going for several dollars more than that, there's going to be less money to spend on the mid-range and low-dollar targets. And in fact, it's very likely some mid-range targets will become lower dollar targets. And so that doesn't necessarily mean you should not draft studs, but you shouldn't be the one going the extra dollar for the mid-range target when you know all the studs are going high. Like if somebody randomly throws out a Paul Goldschmidt in the early stages, if it is that sort of room where all the high-end targets are going high, there's a good chance anybody thrown out at that point is going to go high. And so you don't want to be the one bidding on those at all.
Yeah, and to that point, Scott, when the room is hot, I guess you could call it, you don't want to throw out players that you want, because more than likely they are going to go for more money because everyone's kind of in money spending mode. And there will be a point in the auction where people are all right, starting to slow down a little bit, and maybe guys are going for some values, and maybe that's when you want to throw some guys out that you do like. I do just want to quickly defend having a plan, because I do have a very specific plan going into each and every draft, and it's finding player ranges within a tier, guys that have similar projections that I think are going to go for a similar dollar amount. For example, like the most clear example to me is third base, right? Austin Riley, Devers, assuming healthy, and Manny Machado. All kind of similar projected players this upcoming season. Say I want to spend around $25, and I'll have a range. Like I want to spend 23 to 27 on this group, and I'll have that written in for third base. And you kind of have to be agnostic about, I don't really care which one I get from this group, just that I want to get one when they're nominated if I can get them at a good value kind of thing. Now, if your plan is kind of built around, hey, I need to get this guy, then you might want to throw that player out early just to know if you get that player or not. Like if your entire strategy is built around that player. But I basically do that for every position. I'll say I want to spend $5 on my catcher too. I want to spend $30 on my SP1, and I will find 3 players I really like that are projected at around $30. And I'll just try to make sure I get one of those players. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's how I like it.
No, it's true. I think the kind of the default thinking is always nominate guys you don't want, but it's very much a feel thing. I can't tell you exactly when you should nominate a player you want versus one you don't want. But there are times when you want to nominate somebody you want, just because the places you would pivot to if you can't get them for the price you want are running out. And so you don't want to leave yourself with nowhere to pivot if you can't get that singular target at the price you want. So just go ahead and put them out there, see if you can get them. And if you can't, then you have things to pivot to.
All right, let's take our final break. When we return, there's still a lot to talk about, but we'll do that right after this.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. A 16 beats a 1. From sweet to elite to the Final Four.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball. Today we are talking auction draft strategy. And Chris, I know obviously you don't really have a plan going in, but do you have a general draft strategy in this format that you like to go by? Do you like to go stars and scrubs? Do you like to spread the wealth? Does it just depend on the day? Like, do you have a normal set strategy or something that that has worked for you in the past that you like to do?
I would say it's less. I am more willing, I think, from our discussions to pay up for the $40 players than you guys. You two both talk a lot about you tend to want to spread your money out, and I don't as much.
I don't know that that's true in the size leagues that people listening.
Sure, maybe 12 teams.
It's more for deeper leagues that I like to spread out the dollars.
What I would say though is, here's a little psychological tip I have picked up on. in auctions. And it didn't play into the Dynasty League draft today because we didn't take a break. But I have noticed people tend to run hot early. And then especially if you take a break about an hour and a half in, which most leagues will do, people just dry up immediately after they come back from that break. I don't know what it is, but like this has actually been kind of my conscious approach lately is I will buy a couple of the high dollar players in the early going and then just kind of try to be patient because I've got the way my brain works. I want to be on the action all the time. And I'm just like, oh, I like that guy. I need to consciously tell myself. And this is where like the psychology of drafting really plays in with auctions is knowing yourself and your league mates and how people tend to react. But I've tried to be active early, but not blow it. And then be sitting on a sizable amount of money for the middle class and be able to kind of pick and choose who from the, I don't know, 50 to 150 range of the rankings I want and be able to be flexible enough to go that extra dollar and fill out my roster that way. That's one of the things where I don't know if it's stars and scrubs or whatever it is, but like stars and scrubs is a viable approach. You just do have to be disciplined about it. And that's something that I'll struggle with because like what you can't do if you're going stars and scrubs, let's say you go like classic stars and scrubs, you get 3 first-round players, which is possible. Yeah. What you need to then do is say, okay, well, Anthony Santander is sitting there for $13 and you think he's a $16 player. So you hit 14 and you end up with him. Well, technically you got a $2 value, but it's going to screw things up because you've just blown a large portion on a good player, but not an impact player. And that's if you're going stars and scrubs, like whatever your approach is going to be, you need to be disciplined and you need to think through the limitations and the downsides and how things can go wrong with that approach.
Yeah. And if you are going stars and scrubs, after you get your stars, you're basically just sitting out for a while. You shouldn't literally turn your back because you never know when a surprise $4 player is going to go off the board. But that's kind of the price range you're living in. And you can get some late in the draft. You can get some great values in that $3 to $6 range. So that's what those are the kind of scrubs you're shooting for. And you're kind of ignoring the whole like $12 to $20 range of players.
Scott, to your point, you kind of touched on this earlier. I think league size and depth really can contribute to what your strategy or philosophy might be going into the auction, right? Where in a 10 or 12 team auction, you can more so go with a stars and scrubs approach because the players that you're going to get as like $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 players are just going to be better overall players than the ones that you'll get in a 15 team mixed league or an AL or NL only league, where in those formats, maybe you want to live more in the $10 to $25 range where you just know you can have a solid starter at every position throughout your draft.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know how much I have to add to that with really deep ones like AL, NL only, which I know hardly anybody plays in anymore. I pretty much just don't even buy anybody in the $30 range, much less 40. Because the scrubs are going to be true scrubs. Like you're not even sure they're going to get at bats kind of scrubs. And
you don't want $1 or $2 players in mono leagues. You just don't.
But
I think standard the minimum is like $4 or $5 players.
Standard size leagues, like a 12 teamer or certainly less. The shallower the league is, the more I am in favor of stars and scrubs because the scrubs are the impactful players. The scrubs are the ones you're trying to trade 2, 3 for 1 for during the season. So just do it from the get-go. That might be the biggest benefit to a salary cap draft is you can make those kind of 2 for 3 for 1 trades you're trying to make in season. You could just make them in the draft itself, essentially, by just straight up buying them when you have, when they're actually an option for you to buy them and filling out your roster with players who you're likely to replace. off the waiver wire in season. Shallow leagues, there's going to be a lot of turnover on the waiver wire, and it's going to be quality turnover. So take advantage of that in a shallow league by loading up on studs and taking your best shot with scrubs, but knowing it doesn't end with the draft.
Obviously, knowing how much to spend on a player is extremely important. We've talked, alluded to that multiple times throughout this podcast. But how does one come up with auction values? I mean, I think there's multiple ways that you can go about it. Like Fangraphs has an auction calculator where, you could plug in a projection system, plug in all your league settings, and it'll spit out auction values on how much a player should go for. I know NFBC has average auction values like they do ADP. Those are also for 15-team roto leagues, so not necessarily applicable for everybody. So, I mean, either of you, like, how should someone, like, if someone's just getting into an auction for the first time, outside of just looking at our auction values, how do you come up with auction values?
Well, I would kind of say just look at our auction values, or it doesn't have to be ours. It doesn't have to be ours. You just need to know that it adds up to the total amount of dollars that are going to be spent in your league, so that you can gauge things in those early stages, whether people are overspending or underspending, how much money is going to be left out there later in the draft. You can tell that by seeing relative to what the auction values are, how much people are spending.
Unless you are like a math whiz and have like a system for it, it's probably not worth the squeeze to come up with your own auction values. You should just be, use our combined or Fangraphs auction calculator or any number of projection systems that are out there. It's just going to be, easier for you to really, ultimately, what you want to know is what the market value for these players is, and then adjust based on who you like and figure out which. But like, what I think it's more valuable to just have that idea of what the market's going to look at and say, okay, well, this guy, the consensus is that this guy's a $22 player, and right now he's at 16. Hit +1. That's fine. Like that I don't think it's going to be worth it for most people to come up with a full auction value of their own.
Do either of you have a typical hitter versus pitcher split? And I mean, does it matter? Because in the standard auction uses $260 budget, as I mentioned earlier. In roto leagues, there are 23 active spots, 14 hitters, 9 pitchers. That means hitters take up 61% of your roster. I think most leagues that I've been in and most analysts I've talked to, I mean, usually 60 to 70% of your budget on hitters is what I hear most. And then the rest of that money being spent on pitching. But do you guys have a specific split that you try and target heading into a draft?
I never really break it down that way. It's more how much I want to spend at every single position, and pitcher is among those positions, and how much I want to spend on pitcher kind of depends on how deep the pitcher pool is in that particular year. It's a very deep year for pitching this year. So I might spend closer to 80% of my budget on hitting this year, or 75 or something like that. But it's not something I'm usually that conscious of. I just know generally going into this year, pitching is not something I'm going to be doling out big dollars for. Which means, of course, I did it in the AL only auction the other day.
Well, and
AL only is a different story.
It also, like, you got to read the room more than anything, because at least in the snake drafts we've done, I haven't done a full auction yet. I think AL Labor is this Friday for me, and that'll be my first. So that we'll see. But in the mock drafts that we've done so far, and even the drafts we're going to play out, I've noticed pitchers tend to be pretty cheap. And I'm interested to see how that's going to go in the auctions, because if that's the case, that might make me even more interested in paying up for a Zach Wheeler type, just because if I know that at no point in the draft are people going to be paying up for pitching, then getting that distinct advantage might have even more value.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about tiers in auctions, because I kind of mentioned this earlier. With my plan is that I will look for, players within a specific tier that have a similar projection, right? And I could just they're interchangeable, and I don't really it doesn't matter to me which one of those that I get. And Scott, something that we'll hear during auctions is you don't want to get the last player in a tier. Do you want to get the first or second player in a tier? Why do tiers matter in auctions?
Well, because everybody vaguely has the same tiers in mind, and you will often see when the second best player from a tier goes and the best is still out there, the second best who goes before will often go for too little because everybody's holding out for the best. And then when the best is nominated, he'll end up going for way too much. So that's not universally true. And sometimes you're disappointed to find out you could have gotten the slightly better player for less than the second best player. But that's better than the alternative. That's better than waiting too long and then having to go well beyond your budget, or probably just backing down completely when that last player from the tier gets called. So, ideally you might use the first player from the tier as a testing ground, see what he goes for, so you have an idea what the value of the rest of the players in that tier might look like. But then if you see a comparable price to that before the tier is depleted, you should probably go for it if you want a player from that tier rather than waiting till the very last one.
Especially when it's a high-end tier, right? I know all three of these players are they don't play the same position, but this year it feels like there's a tier of three up top with Judge, Ohtani, and Bobby Witt. And whoever is the last of those three to be nominated, they might go for more money than the other two just because everyone knows, hey, these are a clear top three, or, in most people's minds, a consensus top three. And I want in on that player. So, and high-end pitchers, similar thing, there's Skubal, there's Skeens, there's Zach Wheeler. So the last person in that tier that's nominated might go for a couple more dollars than you would expect, just because everyone sees the drop-off at talent coming at that position. What about nomination strategy? We talked a little bit about this earlier, getting money off the table, maybe nominating some players that you don't want. Chris, do you have a specific strategy with something like this? Do you is it always just nominate players you don't want to get money off the table, or do you try and change things up so that people don't read your moves, right? Maybe you nominate a player you do want just so you're not predictable, I guess.
I mean, I don't care if everybody in my draft knows I don't want a specific player, because there's still 11 other guys out there. And if it's a player that I know I'm lower on, I don't care if everyone else knows I'm lower on them, because the market is still going to be what the market is, right? Like not every player is not going to have 12 people bidding on them, and it only takes 2 to jump a player's price up. So I don't worry about like being predictable or not. The one thing I will say is I generally do try to focus on players that I don't want, who I think are overvalued. So like this year, Roki Sasaki might just be my number one nomination in every draft, just because I think people are too high on him. He's dropping a little bit, but still a top 100 player. But I think you can also go the other way and take your late round guys that you do like. And there is value in locking in some price certainty with some of your sleepers and saying, I think this is a $5 player. And everybody's worried about the big dollar guys. Sometimes there can be value in throwing out a later guy for like $2. Just seeing. Yeah, no, it can go wrong. That's why you can't get too focused on the specific player you have to have, because then if you put that guy out for 2, what you're hoping for is the whole room just goes, well, hold on, I don't want to spend $3 this early. But
that's why. Okay, go ahead. Finish your thought.
But what you don't want is, oh no, someone bid 4. Well, now I got to go 5. Now that's what you don't want, because you never want to be in a position where you have to get a player, unless the way the draft has worked. But like early on, I don't think you ever want to be in a spot where you're like, I need that player. That should never be your thought process.
Yeah, early on it shouldn't, because there are plenty of alternatives. But what I like to do is pretty early, maybe my first or second nomination, I like to throw out a pretty obscure player who I know I'm not going to get for $1. Somebody's going to bid something. It's not a player I want. It's not a player I care about. It's just a pretty obscure one who would go typically late, but I know I'm not going to get him for $1, right? And see what it goes for. To see if you're in the sort of league where no matter what you throw out there, because everybody has a pile of money, they're gonna pile money onto this guy. And if they do, which is usually how it goes, usually money gets piled onto that obscure player. Definitely don't nominate your favorite sleepers for a while.
Yeah.
Because the same thing's going to happen with them. So, play it a little more by the book, nominating high-end guys or other obscure, ideally, actually, other obscure players that you don't really want. Until that price starts to come down to a range where it's like, yeah, I can live with that.
I will say, though, one thing I do like is to nominate a player you truly think is a $1 player who you would be happy to have for $1 and happy to let go for $2, and just see. Like, I always think about it. The Cody Bradford one last year, I think in our head-to-head auction, I threw him out really early in the draft for $1, and I got him for $1, and it was like, who? And it was like, that's because I specifically knew that was a guy that was going to be one of my $1 targets, but I didn't need him. There were plenty of other sparps. It was just, I don't mind locking up a roster spot on this specific $1 sparp. And if I don't get him and someone else spends $2, great. That person's got one fewer dollar than they should.
Well, Chris, what happens if you do get a player for $1 early on, and then let's say later in the auction, you only have a few spots left to fill, and there's a value in like the mid-tier, and maybe you've already filled that spot with like a $1 player,
You probably don't want to do that at a spot where you only have one lineup spot.
Right. So maybe an outfielder or a starting pitcher.
Yeah, I think outfielder or starting pitcher, one of the, like this year, it's not a good year for sparps, but there are a lot of sparps who I'm perfectly fine with $1 on. Like I would love in my head-to-head points auction to get like 3 or 4 $1 sparps of the Mike Soroka, Grant Holmes, whatever range. And so I'm perfectly willing to throw those guys out there early on and just hope that the whole league says, I'm not going to worry about that yet. Like that guy's that guy's barely even worth rostering. Cause like if it works out, it can be a pretty big hit. If it misses, who cares? It's $1.
Yeah. Well, I don't like giving up too much late round fodder early. The ones I'm genuinely interested in.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. It's specifically the guys that I would be happy to have him, but I can take or leave. It's not important to have. It's not like, Carlos Correa could go for $1 or $2 in a lot of drafts, but I think should be a $6 or $7 player maybe.
Right.
I'm not going to throw him out early because.
Okay. So you're hoping to get him for 2 or 3.
I'm hoping to get him for what people actually value him for rather than what I value him for.
Right.
So it's more about those true like last round types of players.
Nomination strategy, and maybe you're about to pivot to this, Frank. End game? Are we going to talk about end game?
We were going to get there, yeah, but you could bring it up now.
Okay. Nomination strategy becomes a lot more important in the end game. The end game is the most important part of the auction, and I feel like it doesn't get as much attention because you want to be the one who controls the bidding in the end. But that doesn't mean you leave yourself with a huge pile of money, because obviously you don't want to leave money on the board. You want 2 to 3 times as many dollars as you have spots available, ideally. Once you get to that point where your budget is 2 or 3 times as high as your spots available, you are being very, very, very careful from that point forward, because you don't want to get to a point where you have nothing but dollar bids left. That is the ultimate way to sink an auction, I feel like, because obviously your only chance at a player is a guy you nominate yourself. And if anyone else in the league bids him up, you got to wait through a whole round of nominations to have a chance at somebody else. And you're going to end up with some true scrubs that way.
Here's what else you want to avoid. If you only have $4 left, let me think if you only have $4 left, you probably don't want to nominate a $1 player. Because what's going to happen is you're going to nominate one, Next bid's going to be 2. You're capped out below your max for that next one.
So that's what I was getting into about nominating late. When you have when you're clearly in end game mode, 2 or 3 times as many dollars as roster spots. The players you're putting out there for $1 are sort of like you were saying earlier, Chris. Ones you could live with for $1, but you don't really want. They're not your favorites of the remaining options. You could live with them for $1, be okay. But ideally, you're just trying to bleed others out of money with that nomination, and wait for the others in your league to put out the players you really want, and then jump in quickly with 2, or go straight to 3 if it's one you really want, or go straight to 4 if it's one you really want. And you
know what other people's max bid is.
And I think that's where you can get in trouble if you do true stars and scrubs. If you're too aggressive early on, and then next thing you know, you've got $7 left for your final 7 spots. Everything that these guys are talking about is you can only nominate a player for $1. So even if you think, hey, I could sneak this guy by for it's a $5 player, I think I could get him for $1, you're most likely not going to get him because everybody else just needs to go 2, and you don't have a bid that you can go higher. So you really do need to pay attention to that end game, and maybe saving, like Scott said, double or triple the money you have per roster spot. So if you have towards the end of the draft 5 roster spots left, leave yourself $10 or $15 just so you can maybe go $2 or $3 per player on those final rosters.
I will say I would rather be stuck with 4 $1 players at the end of my draft where I have no money left than leave $20.
$1,000.
Like the worst thing you can do is leave more than a $5. Like I would much rather. There are still going to be viable options.
For $1 players is okay, but sometimes you see people with 12 $1 players.
Partially just because you're spending half your draft just nominating $1 players you're never going to get like that. But I just as a general rule, I would rather err on the side of not having enough money left than having too much money left, because that means you're leaving value on the table.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up a few other quick things on nomination strategy. I typically do like to throw players out there that I don't really want to draft myself. I think early on in the draft, when there's a lot of money and people are aggressive with spending, Chris, something you said, like throwing out a hype player that is like a mid-tier player, like a Roki Sasaki, or in your case, you don't want Lawrence Butler. You know he might go for $3 to $5 more than you're willing to spend on him. Throw him out early when
Wyatt Langford.
The draft is hot and people are going to spend money on that player, or just
like, you know what I might do the first round of every auction? Whatever I have Wyatt Langford for 20, 21, 15.
I don't know what you have him for.
Yeah. Whatever I have him for, I think it's 15. I will throw him out for that exact dollar amount. And cause that way I know he's going to go either I get Wyatt Langford and great. I'm happy to have him. He's probably going to go for a lot more than that. And I think there's a chance of even more inflation if you start him at a higher level than if you start at 1 and let people build.
I also like nominating players at positions that I already have filled, just because I know I'm not really going to be in on that player. Again, same example as earlier, Machado, Riley, Devers, similar tier, similar projected players, $25 players-ish. If I already have Machado on my team, maybe my next nomination is Devers. I know I'm not going to be in on that player, and I know he's still going to go for around $25. So let me just get some of that money off the table by doing that. What about bidding strategy? And if you haven't realized, we're going to go a little bit longer just because I want to give this format its due. It's very interesting and there's a lot of strategy behind it. Talking about bidding, there are many different ways that you can go about this as well. You can bid early in the count, going once, bid, or you could wait until the very last second and bid, which will throw someone like Chris crazy.
If you hear free advice for anyone in my AL labor draft later this week, if you wait until the last second to bid on a player that I was about to win, I will 99% of the time go that next dollar immediately. Yeah. It is the worst character flaw I have as a fantasy player, and I cannot beat it out of myself.
There's so much psychology involved in it too, because if you're having a bidding war with someone and maybe you change up your cadence. You wait till the end to bid, and then that other person bids, and then you bid right away again. And then they kind of get thrown off.
Yeah.
Say, oh, what the? There's different ways about it. It's interesting.
I try when I want somebody to think I'm reluctantly bidding a player up and not that I've been waiting the whole draft for this guy to come up. I tried to wait until late in the countdown to bid him up. I don't know that it actually works. I have no evidence that it actually works. Maybe on Chris, it has the opposite effect. Sounds
you're gonna lose that player.
Yeah.
Man, if Gus Johnson says sold, but it didn't actually sell, oh, I see red. I'm gonna just leave my home and come find you.
Well, and a word of warning for people who are listening and potentially drafting with me later on. There are times I am actually reluctantly bidding the player up.
Mm-hmm.
I am deciding with 2 seconds left, I can't let him go for that little, and I'm bidding him up. And so if you automatically bid me up thinking I must really want this guy, well, you may end up taking him home because so like you can't be sure exactly what I'm doing. It's probably better just not to pay attention to the cadence of my bidding because there are also times when I'm in a quick volley with somebody and I just stop. We just get to the breaking point. I can't go any higher. I wanted him, but that's it. So I don't know. I wouldn't read too much into it is the bottom line.
And again, there's not a right answer. It's how you like to do it. Whatever you've had success doing in the past or, there's no right answer. It's an interesting part. And it changes too, depending on if you're doing an in-person auction versus being online too. Cause online, you really have to be careful with the +1 button because sometimes people will jump bid. They want to move along a first round player, right? Say someone throws out Paul Skeens for $5 and the next bid is, hey, I want to keep this moving. I'll manually submit $35 and you hit +1 thinking that it's going to be $6. Next thing you know, you're bidding $36 on a player. Yeah. So you really have to be careful of that in an online auction.
It's not even just that. It's sometimes 6 people press +1 at once.
Yep.
And it takes a
you
second
just happen
for
to be
the
the last
to
one,
register. Yeah. And so like it goes way up beyond what you were thinking you were bidding. I almost never hit the plus button. I almost always type in the number.
I almost never type in.
Well, I tell that to people and they act like it's some major hardship to type in a number. I mean, most keyboards have this little calculator interface on the right side. You just you've been punching numbers into a calculator your whole life. You know where the numbers are. You just hit the 2 numbers and hit enter. It's not hard. And you save yourself a lot of heartache potentially by doing that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the prudent way to do it to make sure that you don't wind up hitting +1 on a player you don't really want. Obviously, if you're doing it in person, which I should have brought this up earlier, if you haven't done an in-person auction, it is the best experience. It is just so fun. Just everyone head to head. If you're, trying to bid on a certain player and you're just throwing numbers out there and you'll hit them with a, yup, I'll take that player. It's just, oh man, it's so fun. Do you guys ever jump bid? I brought this up earlier, but not even just jumping from 5 to 35, but when you're in a competitive bid, jumping $2 to throw someone off, or when there's a round number coming, you're in a bidding battle for Aaron Judge and it's at, $38 and you just go, let me go 40. Instead of going 1 by 1, just jumping 2. Do you guys ever do anything like that?
Yeah, that specifically, if it's 9 and if it's already at 9 and I know I'm only going to spend 12, I can only go 12. I might just jump straight to 12 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I can live with giving up $1. If it's at 9, best case scenario, I'm going to get him for 10. I can live with potentially giving up $1 or $2 at that stage, but I'm not likely to do the, when we're in a later stage of the draft, there's still a fair amount of money out there. But it's not, it's not early where you're expecting everybody to go for huge sums of money. I'm not going to go from 5 to 20. I'm going to see if I can get the guy for 16, so it just depends. In very narrow circumstances, I might skip $1 or $2.
I will also say when you're late in your draft, there will be times when You have $16 left for 4 spots. And so your max bid is 13. One thing and let's say there's one really good player left, like a player who's clearly an outlier for the rest of the group. That's when I will either jump straight to my max or make sure I'm only bidding odd numbers. You get me? Because you can get, like I said earlier, you can get locked out of a player. If you are the one who bids, your max bid is 13 and you bid 12, you're out. If you don't get that player for 12, you're done.
Right.
And so that's one other thing that I would say is like, be cognizant of what your max bid is and make sure that you don't accidentally box yourself out of your max bid on a player. And that's very specific circumstances, but it's when there's one clear outlier player remaining.
Okay.
Or one clear
I was going to
need.
ask about that because I was going to ask how strict you are with your max bid. Because if it's end game, if it's that point in the draft where I'm saying, you have 2 or 3 times as many dollars as roster spots left, and you're going to jump in exactly at 2 or exactly at 3, depending on how good the player is, and that's it. Because if they go for more than that, you got to control the end game. You can't afford to go beyond that bid. So I'm very strict about my max bid in that scenario. But if it's earlier on and we're in the $13 price range, I might want them for 13. 13's the number I have in mind. Yeah. But if I got to go to 14 to get them, I'm not going to sweat that too much.
I'm specifically talking about situations where you have a max bid and like it would be nice to have a few extra dollars to play with, but like there will be times when there is one save source left and you need saves. That it's not always going to work out, and there might be plenty of times when you're better off spending that 15 or whatever on 4 players rather than 13 on 1 and whatever. But there are going to be times where you have to be cognizant of what your max bid is and make sure you can get to it. Because the way, if you're going against one person, you're on the even number and your max bid is 13, you might need to make sure that your next bid is not 10, it's 11. Am I making sense?
Yes. Yeah. I understand what you're saying. And sometimes I'll even use a jump bid later on in an auction to get to my max. Say your max is 12 and you're 7, 8, 9. I'll just jump from 9 to 12 to hit my max bid just so like no one else can't lock me out. Yep. Obviously someone else could still go 13 if they have that money, but doing that jump bid that late and getting to my max bid, at least I feel like I gave it my all to try and get that player if I really want that player later on in the draft. A couple of rapid fire things I'll quickly wrap up with here. You guys mentioned this. Please try your best not to leave money on the table. It's just an awful feeling if you get to the end and you didn't spend up on you could have won $1 or $2 earlier on a first or second round player, and then you by the end you realize, oh crap, I have a bunch of like 6th round players. I don't know if this team is going to compete. Anything, so
$1 or $2. I don't lose sleep over that. That may have just been the cost for making sure I controlled the end game, and I can live with that. But you just don't want to leave, $15 on the table, something like that.
Yeah, it's just it's a terrible feeling. If everybody is overspending early on, right, on these first or second round players, do you join in? I mean, is there a limit? If everyone is going, let's say $3 to $5 over what you have them valued at, are you okay getting in on that? Is there a breaking point? If everyone's going for, I don't know, $6, $7, $8 more than they should, do you just say, all right, like there's going to be really good values at some point. Let me just kind of sit.
Yeah, it depends. It depends how much they're going over by. And I can't give you a precise number. I might go into a 12-team draft, let's say, so on the shallower end, wanting 4 studs. And if they're all going for $5 beyond their projected amount, $5 to $10 beyond their projected amount, okay, maybe I'll only get 2 studs, and I'll take advantage of some of those dollars that will not be available later to create discounts.
One thing I will say
as far as I go
is it probably also depends on who the guy is in the first, among those studs. If they're all getting pushed up, I don't think I want to be the one who pays a premium for Mookie Betts. who has a nice safe floor but doesn't have the $55 upside return, I'm more likely probably to draft a guy who I think is in the same tier in like Elly De La Cruz. I'd be more likely to chase that dollar sign on the guys who have that super, super high end upside. And look, it's hard to define that, but in Elly De La Cruz's case, like a 35-70 season. Mookie, I mean, we saw one 2 years ago, so it's not like impossible, but generally speaking, I don't think Mookie has the Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Bobby Witt ceiling that we saw last year. So if you are going to pay, I think I'd rather chase the potential for the huge returns if I'm going to have to pay that super premium for a high-end player.
All right. There is a lot to talk about. Is there anything that we've missed? I'm sure we could probably do a 2-hour podcast on this, but is there anything that we haven't talked about that you guys want to mention before we wrap up?
I mean, are you more likely to pay up for closers in this format in an auction than a snake?
That's exactly what I was thinking is, there is that scarcity for saves.
Yeah.
And so that's always a dollar amount. Like I always have a dollar amount in mind that I want to spend on that. And it's usually not enough. And that's okay in a shallower league, but in a deeper league, that scarcity becomes even more profound. And so you have to, maybe you have to be willing to budge on that a little bit to avoid chasing saves all year long. But yeah, that is that category in particular. The scarcity just feels a lot more acute during an auction than it does during a draft, where you kind of know what points you can find it.
Also, just at the end of the draft, I will say your focus for your dollar players and your reserve round players, if you're in a league with a reserve round draft, should be more exciting, higher upside players who you might have to drop, but you'd rather spend the $2 at the end of your draft or spend a reserve round pick than the $250 in fab that you might spend in the first waiver run. So, I mean, those guys who are on the bubble at the end of spring training, we're not like, if we don't know, like if Rafael Devers is suddenly playing a ton of DH this spring and we don't know if Christian Campbell is going to make the roster, you should be more willing to spend $2 or $3 at the end of your draft just in case, because if he does make the roster and he's a free agent, that's a 40% of the fab type of player.
I got Jackson Merrill in the reserve rounds of my Tout Wars draft last year, and it was just like, hey, this is a prospect I think is going to make the team, and he has upside. Even in a 15-teamer, I was like, yeah, let me shoot for it.
Yeah, it's harder in the deeper leagues like that, but with a reserve pick, sure. But I was going to say the reason stars and scrubs, or studs and duds, whatever you want to call it, the reason it works is because you're in a shallow enough league, your duds or your scrubs aren't actually duds or scrubs. They don't have to be anyway, but you have to give yourself a chance by getting a higher upside player.
All right, we're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.